Let's talk about being Asian American and feeling in between. Let me know if you ever feel like this or if it's relatable. It doesn't necessarily have to be Asian. I'm sure this covers a lot of territory across race, gender, sexuality, and things I'm just really not exposed to. Yeah, first of all, I'm Asian. I'm 5th gen Chinese American on my dad's side, and I'm 3rd or 4th gen Japanese American on my mom's side, depending if you count from my grandma or my grandfather. My dad doesn't speak any Cantonese or Mandarin. My mom speaks just a little bit of Japanese, and the only thing I know is some Japanese that I learned in high school. The area I grew up in was very rural and predominantly Caucasian. Most of the time I would be one of maybe 2 or 3 Asians in my class if I'm lucky. But honestly, I would say that I fit in fine growing up. I had friends and never really experienced anything that I would classify as hate, really just outside of the random Asian jokes that I played along with. And with that came very limited exposure to my Asian culture. Granted, with the limited exception of like my grandmother making me kappamaki or the cucumber rolls, taking my shoes off inside, and going to Japantown, San Francisco to get Japanese Pokemon cards, which I still actually have, and I plan to make millions with them. Or maybe hundreds, or tens of dollars. But outside of that, I'd say I didn't get a strong Asian influence growing up. I didn't fly back to Asia to visit my non-existent relatives. I didn't have Saturday Japanese school, and honestly, very few Asian friends. Granted, I did have some, and they were pretty close growing up, but overall, I didn't really understand the whole Asian culture thing. My senior year of high school, I did take a foreign exchange trip to Japan in the Osaka region, which just confused me more, but also exposed me briefly to a more relatable world that I just quickly also ignored. And this mindset pretty much continued throughout college. Most of my close friends from this time are not Asian. I'd say about 20% are, but also that's the Asian demographic of the college that I went to. And granted, nothing wrong with that, right? Up until that point, it was very easy to have an identity. I just needed to be Asian, even though I didn't really know what that meant. And honestly, that's not to say all my friends during this time treated me as a token Asian. In fact, very few did, and if they did, I would just play into it. So by no means was I hurt or ostracized by this. For the most part, it actually allowed me to fit in better because it was something that made me unique.
Can I help you?
Yes, I'd like a magazine.
Would you like Japanese or English editions?
Right. That's right.
That all changed after college when I moved to San Francisco. Honestly, I don't know the numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were more Asians than any other demographic in that area. And for the first year I was there, I stayed in touch with most of my college friends, but for the most part I stayed in North Beach, Marina, and Russian Hill, which are stereotypically more the affluent Caucasian areas. And I didn't really venture outside of that district much just because it felt comfortable. But also, I didn't really fit in like I used to. After that first year, I started a job at a startup where there was over 60% of the folks there were Asian. On top of that, I started to travel to Asia for work. Once every 2 months, I'd be on a plane to Hong Kong. And granted, my friend group just rapidly expanded in diversity and granted internationally too. And I kind of realized I had no business pretending I knew what Asian culture was at that point. I couldn't easily fall back on being the unique Asian kid. Like, I ate seaweed? I mean, hell, who doesn't eat seaweed in SF? This new understanding forced me to find things that I'm more passionate about. I found there were a ton of commonalities I had with my new friend group. In fact, there were a ton of things that were more relatable than I ever could have imagined, but granted, there still was a gap. With my friends growing up, I always stuck out physically, but was totally in sync socially. Now I fit in physically, but I'm out of sync socially. So for that reason, I find myself very in between. I can walk around Hong Kong by myself and not stick out, like I turned on incognito mode. At the same time, everyone assumes I speak Cantonese, and I have no way of communicating with them. The folks I grew up with, though I get the humor and the vibes, I sometimes find it hard to fit in. I guess what I'm saying is both ends of the spectrum have a home base, or a beginning, and they grow, change, and pivot from there, and they'll always have that strong anchor they can compare against, whether they want to be that thing or they want to reject that thing. But where the hell is my base? What's my thing? For me, it just feels super ambiguous. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just rambling. I guess if you like this, subscribe. Either way, I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video.